My name is Ed Lash. I'm a fly tyer from Iowa, and I specialize in deer hair work. And the object today is to tie this bug. This is the most popular bug that I make. The most popular head design on a deer hair bug that I make is a popper. It's the one that most people are familiar with. The most popular tailing for this size bug is a simple multi-layer tail. This is a size 1/0 bug, which is a very popular crossover size for both largemouth and smallmouth bass. That is the finished product. We start with the bare hook. We have a multi-layered tail. When the deer hair is tied in place, we have the untrimmed bug that looks like a puffball. Trimming is then done to yield this stage. The face has been glued, and then when that glue is dried and the face work is completed, we place the eyes to get the final product. I'm going to start talking a little bit about the tools that we use to tie and do that kind of deer hair work. First and foremost is a strong vise. This is a Dynaking Barracuda. Clamp models to the table are the most popular for doing this kind of work. It's not a necessity, but again, that's the most popular. Hair scissors, they have to have a strong frame. These are 5-inch Dr. Slick hair scissors. I do the deer hair thread work with 200 denier GSP thread. My workhorse hair and thread packing tool is a fugly packer from Pat Cohen. You need a tool that will grab the hook shank. Another tool that can be used to do that with is the brassy packer, but as you can see by the size, you have a lot more mechanical advantage with Pat Cohen's tool. Near the eye of the hook, I often use this packing tool as well. I have a Magnum stacker, half-hitch tools, tweezer, bodkin, and I use a hair comb. This hair comb is 25 years old. Some people use pet combs. A dryer sheet. It's very good to help keep down static electricity. You can wipe your tools and materials with it. I usually use it on my hands. Materials for this fly. This is a multi-layered tail. The base layer is calf tail. The second layer is very fine synthetic, and what that does is reinforce and protect the marabou, which is the third layer, and then a fourth layer is a small amount of flash. The body of the deer hair bug is obviously tied with deer hair, and we are going to use orange on the belly. There's a layer of yellow on the top of the hook shank, just above the belly. And then we have a green ring. And in the middle of the green ring, we have a black spot. This is all deer belly hair. It gives the brightest colors. The hook that we are going to use today is my favorite popping bug hook, particularly in this size range. This is a Gamakatsu B10S hook. This is size 1/0. If I was going to be fishing smallmouth, I might lean a little bit toward the size 1 rather than the 1/0 here. If I was going to do strictly largemouth bass, I may go with more of a size 2/0. So we're right here in the middle of the range. This is the most popular size that I do. So let's get started here, and we will start with the tail of this bug first and go from there. This is going to be a simple tail. Tailing is a big topic. We could spend a whole hour or more talking about tailing. This is Vivas 6/0 thread. I often use it for tailing. If I'm going to split the thread and place Marabou in the split thread, I'll use Ultra Thread 140. But if I'm not going to split the thread, I usually use Vivas. We are going to start at the hook point and run the tailing back. One of the peculiarities about this B10S hook is that there's a very short length of hook shaft that is straight from the level of the hook point rearward. At the level of the hook point, this hook shank begins to go into its bend, and so I'm going to show you how we accommodate to that. The other option would be to move this tailing up, further up the hook shank toward the eye of the hook, so we have a flat spot to put our tailing materials. But what that does then is it shortens up the deer hair body, and I think that you get greater buoyancy and greater durability and also just more reliable performance with a longer deer hair body than with one shortened, say, 5 millimeters to allow room for that tail. So I'll show you how to accommodate to having a curved hook shank to put a tail on. Also run into that a lot with certain saltwater hook designs that are really, really nice to use, but they don't leave you much room to put a tail. So we're going to start the first layer of this tail off with calf tail. The length of the tail historically can be the length of the hook up to 1 1/2 times the length of the hook. And the longer you get with that tail, the more likely it is to wrap. So I usually stay at the level of the hook length or maybe a little bit longer for most of my bass bug tails. So we'll need to use essentially all this. Clip it straight at a 90-degree angle. Square up the vise. Place some material on top of the hook, maybe to my side a little. Loose wrap, and then I'm going to pull toward me to tighten down. Tight, tight, tight. And I'm going to begin to wrap this hair down that bend. You can make sure it's on top by lifting it up and wiggling it. So we're going to go down the bend, a couple more wraps. You can see the tail now angles down, and I don't want it to do that. There's two ways of managing it. One way is to take a wrap back and then wrap underneath the tailing material like this as many times as you need to get that tail to prop up. The other option is to lift the tailing material up and simply wrap thread around its base. To post it, usually 2 or 3 wraps are enough. And that's what I usually do, and you can see that that elevates it. That's too much elevation. You can bring it down and adjust it where you like. So that is how you can tie a tail on to cope with going into the hook bend. The next layer that I often put under Marabou, it makes it more durable, it gives it greater bulk, is a fine, fine layer of a synthetic. This is polar air, and so what I'll do is take roughly twice the length of our tail, because I want to tie this in V-style. I've cut that straight across, so I'm going to taper it a little here so it doesn't look funny. And we're going to tie this in V-style. So I'll do the side on the top quarter of the hook a little bit away from me. it is a little bit to your side, and then we'll come back and do this side. And if you get any wayward and unruly fibers, you can trim them. It's not much material, but it's surprising how that adds to the durability of our Marabou. Next up is to take Marabou, and probably the neatest way to place this is in a split thread dubbing loop where you clip off some Marabou, you place it in a split in the thread, spin it up, and then you can deposit it all the way around the hook shank. It's a beautiful way of doing this. I'm not going to do it that way today. We will use this Marabou. One trick here is if the Marabou is getting out of hand, you can really calm it down without using any moisture by using a dryer sheet. That's worth knowing. It's another thing worth knowing that you can really fluff this Marabou up with a dubbing brush. This is gorgeous. So we will take a section of Marabou, and I like a moderately full section of Marabou, and I'm working this off of the quill a little bit at a time. If you're not a real fan of the length of the tips, you can even them up. I would not trim them. So we're going to look at the length here. It's a little bit long. I like the Marabou a little bit shorter than the length of my hair cap tail. And so we'll bring the Marabou up, loose wrap, and then we will check the distribution of the Marabou. And then when we're satisfied, tighten it down. Pretty. On the bottom parts of the Marabou toward the bottom of the tail, you can also pluck the lengths a little bit to give this a little bit of a taper from top to bottom. I often do that on my surface flies. So now it's time to place a little bit of flash, and I usually do just place a little bit of flash. I'm not a big fan of having lots of flash, so I'll take a single strand of crystal flash, double it over, and then tie it in again V-style like we did the synthetic. I'm pretty picky about the placement of this stuff. I want it to be a little bit toward you and a little bit on my side on top. I don't want too much of it, and I want it placed right where I want it. So that's how I've arrived at doing it that way. There's lots of ways to put your flash in. So that completes the tail, and we are going to tie this off. You can tie it off here on your thread wraps, but it's easier in my estimation to just jump the thread down to the hook shank to tie it off. Another thing you can do if you don't like these thread wraps showing is to place a little bit of ice dubbing or sparkly dubbing here and then wrap those thread wraps. I often do that. So we're going to trim our thread and go on to tying the body of this popping bug.